All right, welcome back. So today we are on the Big Rock 6S. There's a few reasons I'm on this RC. I wanted to tune in the shocks because of the last time down at the track. It was slapping really hard, and the shocks really don't feel too bad. But the rear, I'm maxed out on our preload, and the front I am not. But I wanted to check shock fluid, that kind of stuff, and just service them. Wanted to service them and see about changing some shock fluid. I thought I was going to be going up on fluid and doing research, and I wanted to talk about this a little bit. I got a comment, I think, on the Big Rock on my Outcast 8S video when I was shock tuning. Somebody had mentioned that, I think they were talking about the Big Rock 1300 CST. So 1300 CST, they're like, yeah, my RC uses 1300 CST, which is, you know, way up there in weight when you convert it, and I'll put the chart in down below. $1,300 CST is really close to 100 weight. It's like 95 weight. Now, temperature will play some factor in that, in doing some research on it. And when the comment was there, I was like, man, I've never seen any RC that was over like 50, 60 weight unless it was an on-road vehicle. And then I saw around, you know, 60 to 80 weight, but never really saw 100 weight installed into a factory shock in a ready to run. I've never seen it. And in looking up this RC to see what it came with, sure enough, that's probably why I keep saying this RC handles really well on the basketball courts, and I love drifting this thing around because the handling is so well on road, flat dirt, that kind of stuff. But for jumping, this RC never did well for me. It just didn't seem like that type of RC. So in turn, I went back to the stock tires because I put the 6S backflips on this thing, and it did really well off-road. Not really for backflipping, but for, you know, just jumps around the track, and it was landing much better because the tires were literally creating suspension, is what I believe now. So with all that said, I'm going to pull off these shocks. I'm probably going to pull off the rear first and check these spring rates, check the length of them. I believe the rear are longer than the front. So it requires a taller spring, but as you can see, I've maxed this thing out already. Just to get it to perform properly, and this is a problem I always had with spring rates. Now, Arrma does have optional springs, for this in the Arrma brand, and I'll put that list in there for you now. But I tend to go with what I can find. This was one of the optional springs for this. These are 76, and I believe they called for an 80. They actually didn't even list the length, but we're going to take a look at the rear of this thing and see if we can get some things figured out, because I'm really curious to see what made a manufacturer go to 100 weight shock fluid rather than do like smaller holes in the valving to slow it down. Why did Arrma choose on this RC to go ahead and put such thick shock fluid? Maybe that's why it performs so well on road, is because of the shock fluid. When it's that thick, you don't have the rebound that you would normally have. So when you go off of a jump, the suspension is compressed, and then depending on your spring tension, when looking this up, it's 5.5 pounds I think on the front and 6.5 in the rear or something like that. It's something silly. Not much spring pressure at all, but I was just shocked to see the shock fluid weight. And there was somebody in there also leaving a bunch of comments under this guy's comment, and like I said in the comment, I did leave a comment there after reading some of it, is that I personally have never seen that thick of shock fluid in an off-road vehicle. I haven't seen that in a ready to run, let alone even an on-road. I just haven't seen shock fluid that is that thick. Now, I planned on doing this video a couple of days ago, but the problem was locating the fluid. Now, the fluid that I did locate, and depending on the manufacturer, most manufacturers stopped at 1,000 CST. But TLR race fluid, they had a 1325 CST that's 100 weight. So here's the fluid. 100 weight shock fluid is 1325 CST. Now this stuff, $8 a bottle. You can see it's purple in color, and this is from Team Losi Racing. And like I said, I'll throw the chart up there for you guys. I've just never seen something like this before. Oh, that sucks. This thing literally has those bushings, plastic bushings in there. We're going to take a look at these shocks right here. One thing that Arrma does is on their 6S line is the shock shaft covers, and I love that. These, as you can see, they've been bottoming out and have ripped one of the covers, but their 8S line, they don't have covers in there. So after you can see, I've pretty much maxed out the preload to get the ride height where I want it, and that's probably why drifting around, when I cut it and make a sharp turn, one of the rear wheels would pick up and it would carry the wheel, because the shock fluid is just so thick and the spring can't push that arm down quick enough. So I'm really curious to crack this thing open and see what's on the inside of this, see how thick it is. Just try to get all the loose dirt off before I start messing with it. So shout out to the guy in the comment that was talking about 1300 CST, and I want to say he was talking about the Big Rock. See that's really thick. I can feel they're not full. They feel pretty good. boots have really kept the shocks pretty clean. Let's crack one of these things open, and I do want to check the valving. I think the spring rates that they were giving me in their chart was like their basic 6S RC spring rates. God, that's a lot of sand. See, this one didn't tear, it didn't rip, so the inside of it's pretty clean. See, that feels pretty darn good, pretty darn even. They don't push back. Well, they do. So they're set up perfect. You would think that thick it would rebound. Look at the height of that spring. So this has to be the 84 millimeter spring. Wow, that's a lot. I have some 65 millimeter and a 76 millimeter, but I don't know why. And this was listed in the upgrade for the springs in that list. I have a feeling the chart is just a generalization and not real accurate for an upgraded shock. It just says soft, medium, or hard, and I think this was listed as hard because I was looking for a harder spring. Oh yeah, they were cranked down pretty good. I'm telling you, these are probably the best setup shocks that I've had from Arrma. Oh, and there's fluid on the other side of the bubble. No, it's not. The bubble's there. God, that fluid is gray. It's like it's got some like metal flakes or something floating around in it. So I'm going to just dump this out. Look how thick. It's like silver, like putty. Wow. I was wondering how they got such thick fluid and where they got it from. Look at the valving. Really tiny, tiny holes. You would think this thing would never bottom out. But it is spinning around on top of it like it's loose. Let's give it a feel. So the piston is loose, the nut is loose. That's the way it should be. The nut was literally falling off. Well, good thing we opened it. That can cause some issues, especially it not being tight. So we got nut. Yep, washer. piston and washer. God, that valving is it's really small for such a thick fluid. I'm going to count the holes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So it is 8 holes, but they are some tiny holes. It says 3 was faced up. I'm really shocked. And they still felt okay, but this thing was bottoming out so hard. I've truly never seen 100 weight fluid in any ready to run shock. Like I said, I've seen, 60, 70, 80 on road cars, but for an off-road car, like, the rebound would be so bad. All that shock fluid. And then the shock caps are actually put on really tight, which normally they're by hand, but these were snugged on. These are tight. Yep. And it feels reinforced, probably because the fluid is so thick. Wow, same color. This is even like blacker. It's like a gray, like a graphite. This one, same thing. It's loose. It's not tight. As you can see, it spins around, wobbles back and forth. The nut is literally loose in there. Why is that? They should be snug. The piston doesn't need to rock around. And it has a lock nut on it, but the nut is loose. So I wanted to step in here and say, with these shock pistons being loose and rocking back and forth, it allows fluid to bleed out right and left, up and down, which has also caused damage to the shock body, which you're going to see here in a minute, which I believe also changed the color and allowed the metal flakes inside this fluid, because the front, crystal clear, the rear look like graphite with metal flakes. Shock bodies did get damaged on this. Let's get back to it. One bottle should do the whole thing. Look at the color of this fluid. I like the good fluid comes with these caps. It's literally a purple shock fluid. Lab tested, 2 ounces, Team Losi Racing shock oil. Now, you've seen, I've always used the factory team. Everybody seems to carry this stuff. To drive an hour and a half to go find this stuff here. And just to get the 1300 CST, this says 1325. I'm imagining it's a little thicker than this stuff. But I mean, this stuff looks like graphite. We're going to get these things serviced up. I'm going to get this fluid cleaned out of here. I'm not sure if I'm going to take the bottom apart. I might. But I want to add some new fresh fluid. Get those pistons tightened down. And I'm going to run it again. And we're going to see if it does any better. I don't know what the lifespan is on servicing your shocks. These felt pretty good. It didn't feel good driving it last time at the track, but that could be because I'm running the factory tires and I was already used to the 6S backflips. But I don't know. I might put the backflips back on it but I'm going to service it this way. I am, like I said, this is my ground and pounder. So I'm going to keep it as a ground and pounder. It's just not meant to jump big jumps. I was just hoping to use it at the track because that's where I run all of the time now. But this might have to stay a ground and pounder. I might thicken up the diffs now, give me some more drive. But I do love the stability of this open style diff and the diff fluid that they're using. But we're going to take a look at that stuff eventually as well. Right now we're going to work on some shocks for today. Springs are even. They haven't collapsed. Not one is uneven from the other. So that's a good sign. The RC is not old. I still have the box sitting right here. This is one of my newest RCs, one that I purchased this year. So, and it is still a newer release. It's an expensive RC. Probably expensive for this fluid that you can't find anywhere. Like I said, I drove an hour and a half one way, 3 hours round trip, just to find 100 weight oil. Nobody carries that stuff because nobody ever runs 100 weight shock fluid in any of their RC cars. Comment down below. And shout out to that guy, because there's people in there talking about, you don't know what you're talking about, there's no 1300 CST, you must have read it wrong. Shout out to you. I do read every comment. I do comment in there, right or wrong. You know, like I said, I've never seen it. Now I have. I'm glad you left that comment. I'm glad that you opened my eyes to what Arrma did with this big rock. Like I said, it feels really good to me on road. And it's this fluid that's making me feel that way. I know it. We'll be right back. I'm going to give you guys my theory of what I think is going on here and why it's chassis slapping so hard with such thick fluid in it. It's just the way my mechanical brain thinks. Yeah, see, that's hitting. What is that? Oh yeah. So I don't know. It might look like a reflection to you, but right here on that one side, you see that shiny spot over here? That's where the piston has been bottoming out on the shock and wearing the coating out. This side you can see it as well, right at the same bottom. See, we can turn it around and now it's on the top. You see that? That mark right up there. I don't know if I can show it on camera, but right up there, there's a mark. This one is definitely worse than this one. So here's my theory, my mechanical brain. So by this shock piston being loose in here, when it's cocking to the side, and the side that's up on impact is letting all the fluid bypass from the side. Same thing on compression. When it goes the other way, it's letting it on the low side go back down. So by this piston rocking back and forth on here, instead of the fluid going through the holes, it's literally forcing the fluid through the side, the majority of it. So your dampening will still feel decent, but you're not using the fluid to its full capacity, and that's why I felt the M2C shock pistons did so well. You heard me in the video saying M2C wants the slots facing down. The reason being is those slots dig into the O-ring, so the passage doesn't go through the slots. On impact, when the piston's trying to come back down, what it's doing is it's forcing fluid into the O-ring, causing that O-ring to swell, to push the O-ring out to give it a better seal. And I think that's why they want the slots down. This, by being loose and it not even having an O-ring on the side, it's literally bottoming out on the shock body. so we're not utilizing the fluid. So we did find a problem which we're going to solve, and you could end up solving it without realizing you're solving it, and that's probably why you should always take a look at your shocks, especially when you start. Like me, I was thinking springs are collapsed. I'm going to snug that down so there's going to be no wiggle. It's nice and tight now. We'll get these put back in. You see me always putting some O-ring grease on the bottom by these threads. What that's doing is I'm trying to get some grease on the O-rings that are on the bottom of this, sealing it so that we're not tearing it. So that's going to keep it nice and straight. Same thing as if your shock shaft was a little bent, it would force this thing against the side and you would see wear in there. So, oh, wrong side. I'm going to put that on. The numbers are up. And then our nut back on. So I'm hoping this will increase what the shock is trying to do, and what Arrma is trying to do with these shocks is have that fluid go through those holes and not bypass it through the side of the shock body and the piston by this nut being loose. So that's just an assembly error type thing. So now our piston's tight. We're gonna, you can see there's a little scrape mark on one side of this. You can see there's a line all the way around this piston. So a little bit of scoring going on this piston. And some shock grease. And seal that up nice and make it smooth. Now it feels nice and smooth with no fluid in it. Nice and smooth, and it's hitting the bottom evenly, not to one side. So that's my theory. That's the way my mind thinks. It's just the way it is. I can't help it. I'm going to top off these, bleed them, get it back together, and see if I'm going to use the factory springs because they are not collapsed. See, the fluid still comes in thin for such 100-weight fluid. It's not like it's at diff fluid thickness yet. A lot of bubbles. With thicker fluid, it takes a lot longer letting them sit to bleed. And for those pistons being loose, sure felt pretty good. I'm hoping one bottle will do all 4 shocks. Alright, we're going to let these shocks sit a little bit. So we're going to let those sit up, let them bleed, and then we'll come back and get this assembly done and see how well this is going to work. Alright, let's top these things off. While the camera's off, I kept bleeding them, making sure there was no air pockets, and there's not. Make sure there's no bleed screw anywhere. That shock got dinged. There's the bleed hole. Usually on the side. There it is, right there. There's the bleed hole. So we're going to go ahead, get it close. You can see the air coming out, the fluid coming out. We're going to compress this right before the threads. And we're going to tighten it down. Trying to show you guys the bleed screw. You can see the bleed screw. I'm going to give this some love. Look how fast that pushes out now. Feels really good. Can't put that on yet without the boot. The boot. Shock rod end. Bring our boot nice and straight down to it. This doesn't need much fluid. There we go. Alright. When I get these installed, we'll get the front off. Alright. Got these fronts. See, the coil windings seem like they're more on these stock ones. These just feel too soft compared to those, and yet this part number was under the list. AR330384 was under the list of upgraded shocks, but that looks like a 4S shock. Definitely not as tight as the rear were. See, and this fluid is clear. It's not all granite looking like the rear. This fluid is clear. So it's not showing different weight fluids for front and rear. That's weird that that fluid is clear. And it would look clean. Didn't even look like the rear granite fluid that was in there. Yeah, that fluid is clear. That's why it's leaving a clear spot. So it looks like it had two different. I wonder if the manual is just wrong. That fluid 100% is clear. Shock pistons are loose. They spin and they wobble up and down. This one, same thing. Wobbles up and down. Not as loose as the rear was, but I think this fluid wasn't as thick, even though the manual's saying use 1300 CST all the way around. I think these parts were pulled, and that's where I have a problem with quality control in Arrma. It's like we're trying to maintain their RCs. I'm not going to pull them off. I'm going to just tighten them down. Like, how are you supposed to know that these shock pistons are loose? See, that's, yeah, now they're tight. It's tight. That just sucks. I've looked this up several times to make sure. It's on page 22 of the manual. It tells you in the corner what fluid you need. and it only shows the one 1300 CST. You can see the clear spot in there, and it didn't even fill up this container. I'm wondering if 1300 CST is actually correct for this thing, which is 1325 is what I'm putting in here. Couldn't find anything that was like 1300 direct, but none of it was clear. These springs are definitely shorter. They are 76, 80 millimeter. I'm going to do what Arrma says and put this all the way around, but I'm having my doubts now. No real air bubbles coming out of there. Alright, got to give it 15-20 minutes and cleaned our workspace, and we'll get back to doing it. Look at the clear hole in the center of this now from that fluid. Doesn't even mix with that gray stuff, that carbide looking stuff in the rear. Alright, got these shocks sitting. And what do you think about the different color fluids, front and rear? I'm very curious about that. Do you think Arrma made a mistake? It had the wrong fluid in it? Do you think we ended up putting thicker fluid in it? Because I'm sure this shock shares with another RC with Arrma. Do you think it was supposed to have 1300 CST, or do you think it was 1300 and they're just using a graphite fluid for the rear, which is one manufacturer, and switched? I don't know. It's very hard to believe that you know, perfect. It's very hard to believe that they used two different brands for the same weight fluid on this particular RC. This reminds me of like the infractions and the limitlesses, the way these shocks go together. Non-stop shock rebuilding lately. The rear is definitely much slower coming on the rebound, and so is the front. There we go. Ride height is all the way up where I wanted it for ground clearance. We're going to get out and rip it and see if it does any better. See if those pistons flopping around on the inside, the valving being loose, created the issue that I started feeling when jumping this thing the last time. But we'll find out. Like I said, I went through this RC, put a new body on it, serviced all the bearings, and it was just time to service the diffs anyway. Now, seems nice and plush now. It's not chassis slapping as hard, but we'll get it back out to the track and see how it does. There we go. Like, comment, subscribe. We'll catch you guys on the next video. Get out there, service some RC. repair it so that you can rip it for another year or two. And does anybody know how often should you service? How many battery packs through this RC should you service a diff? I'm curious. What do you guys do? Comment below. Thanks for watching.